Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here.
Senator.
President Biden and the Biden administration have presided over the worst foreign policy catastrophe in a generation. Americans across the nation are horrified. Our servicemen and women, our active duty military are angry, they're disillusioned, and they're frustrated. Our enemies across the globe are emboldened, which makes the world more dangerous today for America, and our allies are dispirited. Ever since the disaster began unfolding in Afghanistan, we've seen the Biden administration making political excuses. We've seen Democrats on this committee explaining at great length how everything that happened in Afghanistan is Trump's fault. It's all Trump's fault. Mr. Secretary, Joe Biden is the President of the United States. Kamala Harris is the Vice President of the United States. You are the United States Secretary of State. Just like Jimmy Carter owns the disaster of the Iran hostage crisis, you own this. The Biden administration caused this disaster. It was caused by two things. Number one, ideological naivete and extremism. Repeatedly, Mr. Secretary, in this hearing and also on multiple conference calls over the last month, you keep saying things like the steps the Taliban needs to take to be welcomed into the community of civilized nations. Mr. Secretary, they don't want to be welcomed into the community of civilized nations. They are terrorists who want to murder us. This administration doesn't understand that. Joe Biden doesn't understand that. But sadly, that ideological extremism was combined with manifest incompetence. There were four decisions this administration made that I think were utterly indefensible. Number one, abandoning the Bagram airfield, giving it to the Taliban. That is a decision that 100 years from now will be studied at war colleges as a colossal strategic mistake, giving up two secure airfields, necessitating an evacuation from a dense urban environment, a commercial airport, which led tragically to the suicide bombings and murders that killed 13 American servicemen and women. Had we been evacuating from Bagram with a secure perimeter, the odds are quite high that attack either wouldn't have happened, or if it had happened, it would have been far less severe in its consequences. Secondly, the Biden administration giving the Taliban a list of Americans and of Afghans we wanted out. Third, the decision to leave Americans behind. Hundreds of Americans, perhaps more, perhaps thousands of green card holders, tens of thousands of Afghans who assisted the U.S. military. The Biden administration abandoned them and left them behind. And fourth, leaving billions of dollars of American military equipment that the Taliban will now use to threaten our lives. Earlier in this hearing, you said about that equipment, quote, none of it poses a strategic threat to us or their neighbors. That does not pass the laugh test. When you're looking at the Taliban potentially having 64,000 machine guns, 33 Black Hawk helicopters, 16,000 night vision goggles, we will see American blood spilled because of these colossal mistakes. Now, abandoning Bagram wasn't your call. It was the Pentagon's and the White House's ultimately. But I want to ask you flat out, did the State Department give the Taliban a list or multiple lists of Americans and or Afghans that we wanted out?
Those reports and the idea that we would do anything to endanger our citizens or anyone else at a time when we were trying to save their lives is flat out wrong. Let me
just like a yes or no, did you give them
let me be very clear, Senator, if I may, please. Thank you. In limited instances where we were seeking to get a bus or a group of people through a checkpoint, we gave a manifest to the people at the checkpoint to demonstrate that those people were expected.
Roughly how many names were on the list you gave?
Doesn't matter because they all...
Dozens, hundreds, thousands. Give us some order of magnitude.
This happened in a handful of situations where to
Dozens?
get through...
So is it your testimony it wasn't hundreds? I want to understand, did you give them thousands of names?
No, we did not.
Okay, hundreds?
Not going to put a number on it, but it was, again...
Why not? This is a hearing to discover how many names and how many of those individuals you gave the Taliban the name to have been targeted for torture or murder.
Senator, by definition, these were in limited instances with a bus or a group of people to get them through a checkpoint. They got through the checkpoint.
So not only did you fail to evacuate Americans and green card holders who were there, but you also brought in tens of thousands of Afghans who had wholly inadequate vetting, bringing many of them to the United States. And one of the things that has done is that has brought in a humanitarian crisis to America. Child marriage and domestic abuse, tragically, are widespread in Afghanistan. According to the World Health Organization, more than half of the women in Afghanistan are married as child brides, and 90% of women are subject to domestic abuse. 90%. On August 27th, according to public reports, you distributed internal documentation highlighting numerous instances in intake centers of sexual abuse in which much older grown Afghan males appeared with children, young children, claimed they were their brides, claimed they were their wives, and the document said the State Department urgently requested guidance. That was your word, urgently. Subsequently, the Department of Homeland Security said that it showed the desperation of families, that they were willing to give little girls to grown men to be subject to sexual abuse and child wives. My question is as follows. Did you receive that urgent guidance? How many children have been subject to sexual abuse? What have you done to rescue young children from illegal and abusive relationships after being brought to America by the State Department?
Across the entire government, everyone involved in the evacuation effort, whether it's at a transit point in one of the countries that we negotiated with, whether it's here in the United States at Dulles or Philadelphia or the military bases, we have all of our officers at extreme vigilance to look for and to deal with any cases or concerns that arise.
Did you receive the urgent guidance, and how many child brides have you seen?
I don't know the specific guidance you're referring to. I'm happy to look at it.
So is there not urgency to discover if children are being abused?
Absolutely.
Time of the senator has expired.
We could detect and deal with any cases, and there have been, to my knowledge, a limited number of cases where we have separated people because we were concerned that they were...
How many?
The cases I'm aware of, a handful.
Senator Kaine, you have the last word today.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member Risch. Secretary Blinken, thank you for the time that you've spent with us today. It's an important hearing, and there will be many more. I'm going to a second one in the Armed Services Committee in about 2 hours, and I expect over the course of the next weeks there will be many. And I'm just going to really speak from the heart to kind of set out what I'm thinking at a very important moment, a complicated moment. I'm the father of a Marine. I come from a state that is very, very heavily affected by the wars of the last 20 years. It was one of the states that was attacked on 9/11. And in the weeks of August and early September, this is basically what I've done. I've watched Afghanistan on television. I've talked to active duty and veterans. I've talked to you and other colleagues. I have visited the Pentagon for the Pentagon employees' commemoration of the 9/11 attack. I went to Arlington on 9/11 to go to the fire station where the relief effort was spearheaded. I've also gone to Fort Lee to, as you have, to see the incredible work that's being done to help Afghans who've stood with us integrate into American life. I've been to the Dulles Expo Center to see these families that have traveled halfway around the world, still traumatized, but looking forward to a chapter where they can be free. And I have a lot of emotions. And so let me just tell you what they are. They're sadness, and their anger, and their pride, and their relief. Sadness. I'm saddened by the unnecessary deaths of the 3,000 or so who were killed on 9/11. I'm saddened by the deaths of more than 7,000 U.S. troops. I'm saddened by the deaths of more than 8,000 American contractors. I doubt there's been a war in the history of the United States where more contractors died than troops, but this global war on terror is one such war. I'm saddened at the deaths of 400,000 innocent civilians in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria. I'm saddened at those who are now going to have to live under Taliban rule. I'm particularly saddened for the families of the 13 troops who were killed. To lose a child in any circumstance is horrible, and war is horrible, but in the last days of a war, that has been declared over and is winding down, I don't know how that wound could ever heal for a parent, and yet those 13 died to save the lives of about 120,000 people who will have the chance to live in a freer and better society because of their heroism. I'm angry. I'm angry at the terrorist impulse. I was angry about it on 9/11/01, the urge to destroy with the planes flying into buildings and killing people indiscriminately, young, old, American, other nationalities, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, no religion. That indiscriminate urge to destroy, to blow up a demolition vest at the Kabul airport and kill 13 American troops and hundreds of your own countrymen and women, for what? That angers me. I'm angered that after 20 years of American investment in an Afghan security force dramatically larger than the Taliban, dramatically better equipped than the Taliban, that security force just melted away and failed. And the one thing I would be a little bit critical of you and the administration is the same point that Senator Romney was making earlier, and Senator Rubio. The notion that General Milley said that nothing I or anyone else saw indicated a collapse of this army and this government in 11 days, I just don't think that's true. I know it wasn't the consensus opinion, and I know it wasn't the most likely possibility, but the possibility of a collapse was not 0%. And it wasn't 1%, and it probably wasn't 10%. It was probably based on what we've been hearing in this committee, and others have too. That was always it was a possibility that had to be grappled with. And I guess one of the questions that I'll get into over coming weeks is, if the administration really said nobody could see this coming, then that probably suggests that the contingency planning for something that was a real possibility wasn't all that it should have been. My anger at the collapse of the security force, we've got to get into it, and we have to decide, did we train them wrong? Did our equipping them lead to corruption? Were they good fighters that lacked confidence in their own military and civilian leadership? Did we want things for Afghans that the Afghan leadership didn't want for themselves? We had good intentions about what we might have wanted in Afghanistan, but let's face it, we can't get 30% of Americans to get a vaccine. We can't get 30% of Americans to acknowledge the results of a presidential election. Do we really think that we can determine what the culture of another country should be? I'm proud. I'm proud of those who served in so many different ways, from first responders who ran into the buildings on 9/11 to this generation of Americans, many of whom didn't come from military families necessarily, but who volunteered to serve. And not just serve once or twice, but this is the only generation, I believe, of the American military that has seen 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 deployments again and again and again. Injured, wounded, carrying some invisible scars that will affect the rest of their life. I'm proud of their service. I'm proud of the country and my Virginians for what they're doing in welcoming Afghans here. The outreach from Virginians to my office, from our Vietnamese community, we want to help Afghans settle. From churches, where do we donate? How do we give to resettlement agencies? When I visited Fort Lee and Dulles, to hear the Afghans express their appreciation to the United States, and even in the midst of their trauma and their anxiety about the next chapter, to be excited about the opportunity to live in a place not under Taliban rule and have an opportunity for better lives of their children. I'm proud that even amidst all of the challenge, that's the way they look at us. And I'm proud of the military who are there who say, I've been deployed 5 times. This mission is the most important mission I'll ever undertake. But the last thing, and Mr. Chair, if you might indulge me, because I may go another 30 seconds past, I'm relieved. No one has said this yet. I'm relieved that a child born at Inova Fairfax today is not born into a nation at war. Some will challenge my characterization because the world's a dangerous place and American troops are deployed all over the world and there's risks and there's threats, but we have been a nation at permanent war for 20 years. We were never supposed to be that nation. Never. Never. We were never supposed to be that nation. I heard a college student at George Washington say recently, I know nothing of war, because with an all-volunteer army, she doesn't have to, but all I know is war. All I know is war. President Biden had the courage to say, this nation is not a nation that should be permanently at war. It's going to take a while for people to wrap their head around the notion that though there are serious threats for us everywhere, we're not a nation now that is at war, ground wars in the Middle East. It's going to take people a while to get used to it. Some people will resist it. Some people will want to say, no, we've got to be on the front edge of our feet and be on permanent war footing at all moments for now into infinity. But I am relieved. I am relieved that for the first time in 20 years, children being born in this country today are not being born into a nation at war. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Let me move into place in today's hearing a record of statement in Afghanistan from recently exiled Afghan women leaders and human rights defenders. It urges the United States to continue to support women's groups across Afghanistan, essential drivers of change. Mr. Secretary, thank you for your testimony. You've been here over 3.5 hours. I think the interest, every member of the committee was present and had an opportunity to ask questions, and you give substantive answers. I'll just close by saying, while the focus today has been the President administration's decisions, this is going back 20 years. And as someone who sat here as a staff director of this committee, as someone who was at the NSC at one time, as someone who was an assistant deputy secretary and now the secretary, I think you might join me in saying that over the last 20 years, at different times, Congress has been misled. Assessments were definitely overly rosy, to say the best. And if we are not to repeat the past, we need to learn from it. And that's what the committee's ultimate pursuit will be. The record of this hearing will remain open till the close of business on Thursday. And with the thanks and respect of the committee for your participation, this hearing is adjourned.
Thank you. Looking to take steps that they need to take to protect some of their basic interests. At the same time, we've established across more than 100 countries and in the UN through a Security Council resolution, basic expectations of the Taliban-led government. And if those expectations are not met and other countries are aiding and abetting so that the Taliban is able to not fulfill those expectations, there'll be consequences for that too.
Well, Mr. Secretary, if I could, what I'm really curious about is, do you have a strategy that you've established